Topic we're going to talk about today, and again it's a shortened version of this, is the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a national holiday in his honor. It's a great story, okay? So let's start a little bit about him. And some of this stuff you might have heard on the video yesterday, okay? So the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a national holiday in his honor. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He was the middle child. He had an older sister and a younger brother. So he was the middle child, having an older sister and a younger brother. Now he grew up on a daily diet of prayer, as both his father and his grandfather were Baptist ministers. So he grew up on a daily diet of prayer, as both his father and his grandfather were Baptist ministers. And ironically, both his father and his grandfather served the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Both. So both Martin's father and his grandfather were Baptist ministers, and both men served the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. So he had it in his blood, you might say, right? Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was a very bright young man. He skipped both his freshman and his senior years of high school, which was very unusual at that time, and graduated from high school at the age of 15. So he's a very bright young man. As I mentioned, he skipped both his freshman year of high school and his senior year of high school, graduating from high school in Atlanta at the age of 15. After he graduated from high school at the age of 15, he immediately entered that fall Morehouse College in Atlanta, and he graduated from Morehouse College in 1948. So after his graduation at the age of 15 from high school in Atlanta, he enrolls in the fall at Morehouse College in Atlanta, and he graduates there in 1948. What's that? Yeah. From college. It gets better. Thanks for noticing that, Rylan. That's awesome. Well, if you're going to be a minister, you've got to get a doctorate degree in what? What? Theology. So he went to graduate school at Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts, to earn his doctorate degree in theology. You don't have to have a doctorate, but that's what he did. Thus the name Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And while he was studying at graduate school at Boston University, he met his future wife, Coretta Scott. And the couple eventually had 4 children. So during his days at graduate school at Boston University, Martin Luther King Jr. meets his future wife, Coretta Scott, and the two eventually have 4 children. 2 boys and 2 girls. You don't have to write this down, but his second born was Martin Luther King III. It was during his studies at Boston University that Martin Luther King Jr. began reading and studying the works of Gandhi. It was during his studies at Boston University that Martin Luther King Jr. began reading and studying the works of Gandhi? Anybody know anything about the works of Gandhi? So where do you think Martin Luther King got his nonviolent, peaceful protest philosophy? From Gandhi. Yep, very good. So it was during his studies at Boston University that Martin Luther King Jr. began reading and studying the works of Gandhi. And because of his interest in the works of Gandhi is where he established his nonviolent philosophy of protest and demonstration. Well, Ryland, in 1955, he earns his doctorate degree in theology from Boston University at the age of 26. Pretty young to get through your education that quick. So at the age of 26, in 1955, Martin Luther King Jr. earns his doctorate degree in theology from Boston University. And what's he do? He goes out and gets a job as what? Pastor. And his first job is he's the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, which was located in Montgomery, Alabama. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. graduates from Boston University in 1955 and takes his first job as a pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And I'll tell you, Dr. King really could have simply been a pastor of the Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, and we don't know anything about him. But in December of 1955, you probably don't have to write this down, a lady by the name of Rosa Parks makes the decision not to give her seat up in a city bus to a white man. Dr. Martin Luther King takes on her cause, leads in a 13-month bus boycott in Montgomery, and all of a sudden the segregation laws are changed, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. becomes the face of the civil rights movement. Just like that. That's what did it. They needed somebody badly, and he turned out to be the guy. So if we don't have, just think about history, kiddos. If Rosa Parks doesn't, if she capitulates and gives her seat up, who knows? Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's little tiny things in history. Well, moving on, after his assassination in 1968, Dr. King was buried in Atlanta, Georgia, near the Ebenezer Baptist Church, in which his father and grandfather so faithfully served. So again, after his assassination in 1968, King is buried in Atlanta, Georgia, near the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Now I'll ask you a question. Other than the day was his name and the day he was born, the day he died, anybody want to guess what else is on his tombstone? Yes? Something to do with that.
And engraved books.
No, what's engraved on his tombstone?
I have a dream.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty. Free at last. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, this really gets to be an interesting story, and I want you to really get into this and keep track of the timelines. In the late 1960s, which wouldn't be too long after he was assassinated, right? Mrs. King urges this man right here, Michigan Congressman John Conyers, to do what? McKenna? Come on, girl. Do you know, Aaron?
Yeah,
Right. Somebody did a paper on that. Is that you?
Oh.
Yes, thank you. So, in the late 1960s, Mrs. King urges Congressman John Conyers of Michigan to introduce a bill in Congress to make King's birthday a national holiday. And he does so. But discussions on whether this was going to happen or not continued from the late 1960s all the way up to 1980. with nothing done yet. Why? Because do you think in 1969 people were going to be in favor of a holiday for Martin Luther? No. But it actually festered, or so to speak, or was discussed from the late 1960s and 1980. Finally, in 1980, a musician, and I spelled it wrong on your sheet, it should be Stevie, a musician by the name of Stevie Wonder, S-T-E-V-I-E. You might know Stevie Wonder is a blind African-American singer, went all the way back in the Motown circuit for years. He releases a single, which is a single record, called Happy Birthday, to try to promote this national holiday for Dr. King. So after 10 years or so of struggling to get this through, musician Stevie Wonder writes and releases a single, which is a one-time song, called Happy Birthday, which I will show you, to promote this national holiday campaign. How else might you, Aaron, get someone to get Congress to do something? What might you do? If you were passionate about this yourself, what might you do to try to get Congress to pass this bill? But you might have what with you? Well, no. What? A petition. So supporters of this went out and started a petition. Supporters of this legislation to give Dr. Martin Luther King Day a national holiday went out and started a petition. By the time they got done, Aaron, over 6 million signatures. It's still the largest petition in American history. So supporters went out with a petition and got over 6 million signatures in support of this bill. Still today, the largest petition in American history. Well, finally, in 1983, the bill passed through Congress. In 1983, the bill proclaiming a national holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. passed through Congress. Here was the vote, so you can kind of get an idea what kind of support it had. In the House of Representatives alone, it passed 338 to 90. Pretty good margin. 338 to 90, it passed in the House. 338 to 90. In the Senate, it passed 78 to 22. Still a pretty good margin. So you can see there was support for it, right? So, as a virtue of that bill passing Congress, on November 2nd of 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed the bill that created a federal holiday to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the third Monday in January. So on November 2nd, 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed the bill into law that created a federal holiday to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which would be done on the third Monday in each January. Now, when did Mrs. King ask for this thing to be started? Late 1960s. When did Stevie Wonder do his song? 1980. When did President Reagan sign it into bill? 1983. Well, finally, on January 20th of 1986, it was first observed as a national holiday, but not in all 50 states. So on November 2nd of 1983, Reagan signs the bill into law, but it's not observed as a national holiday until January 20th, 1986, but not in all 50 states. Why? Why didn't all 50 states have it? Who gets to decide that? The state legislature, right? Every state. Reagan signed it into law, but it had to be passed by each state that wanted to do it, right? Okay? So not all 50 states observed it on January 20th, 1986. One state in particular was the state of Arizona, who were not only heavily criticized for not passing the law, but eventually would lose between $200 and $300 million as a result of their actions. Somebody else said that. Not true. I don't know where that's coming from, but that's a good guess. Maybe a different state. So, now listen carefully. The state of Arizona did not observe the day. They were heavily criticized and would eventually lose somewhere between $200 and $300 million. And Laramie said highway funding. You couldn't threaten to do that. I'm not sure where the other class got that either. But anyway, I might have to look into that because maybe it has something to do. Why did they lose all that money? No, let me give you a story. So Monday I'm up at the school and I see Bobby Michaels and some electricians fishing a wire underneath the bleachers, and I'm just kind of curious, and I said, what are you guys doing? They said, oh, we're putting in a big effort here so we can fix up the speaker system for the regional basketball tournament, and so that, you know, we can switch from microphone to music or some darn thing. And my comment was, in my sarcastic way of thinking, gee, I wonder if they'd go to all this expense and time if I wanted to give a 3-day lecture on American history in the gym. What's my point there? Absolutely, we worry more about sports in this school, and a lot of schools. You know, you don't have perfect attendance in your AP classes 40% of the time because of activities if they care about academics. I'm just telling you. So let's talk it over again. So why in the world would Arizona lose between $200 and $300 million by not having Martin Luther King Day? In 1990, the National Football League awarded Phoenix, Arizona, Super Bowl 27. Now, they offered it to him or gave it to him in 1990, but the Super Bowl wouldn't be until 1993 because they got to give you a few years. You know, you just don't get it and have it. It takes time. So in 1990, it was announced by the National Football League that Super Bowl 27 had been awarded to Phoenix, Arizona, which would be held in January of 1993. Now, backing up a little bit, right after Reagan signed the bill, Governor Bruce Babbitt of Arizona signed Martin Luther King Day into law in Arizona. He supported it. He was a Democrat, and he supported it. So as soon as Reagan, the ink got kind of dry on Reagan's pen, Bruce Babbitt, the Democratic governor of Arizona, also signed the bill into law in Arizona. So what's the problem here? Well, Babbitt was on his way out. And the newly elected governor, Republican Evan Mecham, one of his first acts as governor was to repeal the bill that would make Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday in Arizona. Yep, he repealed it. One of the first things he did, Republican governor. Now, does anybody want to give me any reasons why he would do such a thing? No? If I got money, that would... Anyway, why would he do that? Two reasons why he did it. Got to come up with something here. Why in the world would he do that? Well, that's what people think, and he was. He was. But that wasn't the official reasons given. I think he was racist. What's that? Well, close. He, first of all, didn't believe that the party that he represented, the Republicans, would want such a bill. The people that got him elected governor were obviously not in support of having Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Arizona. So he did it for political reasons. One is he didn't believe that his party, the party that had elected him to the governorship, was in support of that holiday. But he also had personal reasons. Now, we talked about this yesterday, and I'm not sure if it had to do with race or his philosophy of Martin Luther King's shortcomings. Because Mecham didn't believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was any kind of a hero. And certainly we would not make a day, a national holiday, in celebration of a guy that he didn't think was a hero. Now, why didn't he think he was a hero? Maybe because he was racist, but also because he what? Was not faithful to his wife. Okay? And my wife and I had a discussion about that when we watched this the other day. She said, well, I kind of get that. She said, why wouldn't they call it Civil Rights Day? Why do they have to call it Martin Luther King Jr. Day? Well, I said to my wife, I said, honey, here's the thing. You got two different things here. You're talking about person's faults or moral issues and what he was. There was no civil rights movement without Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for discrimination reform among all minorities. I don't know where we'd be without the guy. So you got to kind of separate that from what he did for the country. Yeah.
People act like that towards Gandhi too, because he was apparently really racist towards African Americans.
Yeah.
And so in Africa they took down his statue.
Yeah, no, you can get in trouble nowadays for anything. But my point is, she's exactly right. But Mecham didn't believe he was any kind of a hero. He didn't like blacks, and he really didn't like Martin Luther King for what he stood for. That's why he did it. Can you blame him? I don't know, but that's what he did. So he immediately rescinds the bill in 1987, and now all of a sudden the national holiday is out of the picture, right? Well, the National Football League, upset with the disrespect that they saw towards Martin Luther King Jr., threatened to move the Super Bowl out of Phoenix. And what part of the National Football League especially was upset? Black players, no question about it. But they weren't the only ones. But certainly, when you have a league of a majority of the players are African American or black, they were not too thrilled about that. Especially maybe the black players in the National Football